everybody. I just want to give a nice round of applause to Basil Vasiliou for the beautiful music that he entertained us with while you guys were here waiting. If you'd like to come and see him at his next performance is Thursday, December 5th at 7:30. So you're welcome to come and support him. Thank you very much. Yeah. So I'm excited to welcome you to this special book club presentation and live oral history interview with international best-selling author and Emmy Award-winning producer YVETTE Manessis Corporon. This event is unique because Dr. Nicholas Alexiou, founder of the Hellenic American Project and professor of sociology at Queens College, has done an extraordinary work in ongoing research documenting the Greek American experience, promoting and preserving Greek American history. How lucky are we to be part of this live audience as he interviews YVETTE tonight. My name is Angie Xidias, and I'm the founder of Greek Elder Care Network. Greek Elder Care Network is a social impact company dedicated to providing support and resources to the elderly and their families in the Greek American community. Greek Elder Care Network was founded because of the need I had when my mom, Christina Tsikenis, had a major stroke during the COVID-19 year, which left her bedbound and unable to speak. And because facilities were not allowing visitors, we had to make the hard decision to bring our mother home and not send her to a rehab facility. Not knowing how my brother and sister and I were going to care for her and having no idea where to look for help, where to find caregivers, I thought to myself, I can't be the only one going through this. So I started Greek Elder Care Network Facebook group to connect caregivers looking for work with families looking for help. Our community now has grown over to 1,000 members who support one another in many ways. Our community is growing monthly, and we strive to bring our community together with our essential initiatives that make a difference in many lives. Initiatives like our supportive Facebook group, Greek Family Meal Plan Service, virtual informational sessions with our network partners, community calendar of events, caregiver support group, bereavement support group, Parkinson's support group, walking club, and my personal favorite, the book club, which is very special to me because my mother was an avid reader. This initiative connects incredible authors with our group and immerses our readers in the captivating world of literature. Reading is a universal activity that benefits everyone. Producing tonight's live oral history interview with the Hellenic American Project fills me with immense pride. When YVETTE's new book was introduced to me as a potential pick for our book club, it piqued my interest. YVETTE is a fellow NYU alumni who studied classical civilization and journalism, and I studied classical civilization and Hellenic studies, which makes this particular event very meaningful. The theme of women empowerment is central to the story, resonates with me as it aligns with the work of it aligns with my professional work. We couldn't be more excited to bring her story to our community. YVETTE Manessis Corporon, a first-generation Greek American, draws deeply from her family's roots in her writing. Her connections to Greek adds a rich authenticity to her work. Daughter Ruins takes readers on a journey through time, weaving together the lives of contemporary Greek American women and her ancestors on the island of Corfu. The novel explores themes of love, sacrifice, family, turmoil, and resilience. It's a deeply moving story that follows three women who struggling to control their destinies, fighting to become the women they were meant to be. So tonight I also welcome Dr. Farona Soumakis from the Hellenic American Project, research associate. She will come. I'd like to have her come up here and for short remarks, followed by the Greek American Writers Guild, Mr. Elias Nefortis. Yes, thank you. After their short remarks, we will begin the interview.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me to say a few words. I'm going to be brief. My name is Fevronia Soumakis. I know it's a mouthful. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I just want to congratulate Angie and everyone involved with the Elder Care Network. It's a tremendous initiative, and what I love most about it especially is that we are collaborating with the Hellenic American Project. Just a little bit about myself. I've been teaching in the Modern Greek program at Queens College since 2019, and this academic year I have the great pleasure to serve as a research fellow with Dr. Nicholas Alexiou in the Hellenic American Project. My research overlaps with Dr. Alexiou's. I focus on Greek Americans, and the Hellenic American Project is a very special initiative that Dr. Alexiou has been working on for many years to document to document who we are, our history, our narratives, and our stories and our voices. And we are very grateful for everyone's support and look forward to seeing you at our next event. So thank you.
Καλησπέρα σας και καλώς ορίσατε στη σημερινή μας εκδήλωση. Ευχαριστούμε για την παρουσία σας εδώ. Υπόθηκαν όλα, αυτό έλεγα και στον Νίκο προηγουμένως. Υπόθηκαν όλα, δεν χρειάζεται να πω τίποτα άλλο παρά να σας ευχαριστήσω. Καταρχάς, καλώς ήρθατε, Ιβέτ, να συγχαρούμε, να ευχαριστήσουμε για την παρουσία της την συγγραφέα του βιβλίου, και να συγχαρούμε ταυτόχρονα η Εταιρεία Ελλήνων Λογοτεχνών Αμερικής είναι πάντα στο πλευρό της τέχνης, είναι πάντα στο πλευρό σε κάθε ενέργεια που έχει θέμα τον ελληνικό πολιτισμό και τη δράση των Ελλήνων στο χώρο μας. Δεν θέλω να πω τίποτα άλλο γιατί υπόθηκαν ήδη. Ευχαριστώ.
Okay, so thank you once again for being here today. Because this event is being taped in front of a live studio audience, please refrain from talking during the taping because the microphones can really pick up all the sounds. And if you guys can all take out your phones now and silence them so we don't have any interruption with any calls coming in. If everyone could just silence their phones. And don't forget later, if you can follow Hellenic American Project, follow Yvette on social media, and follow Please Greek Elder Care Network so we could all stay connected together. Thank you so much. Enjoy.
Let's start, you state your name, the place of birth, the family roots, and who came first in America, if you know something about your family.
Of course, I know a couple of things about my family. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having me here, Professor. I'm so in awe of your work and so impressed, and I'm so grateful to even be included in the conversation. And thank you so much. It is truly a great honor to be here having this conversation with you and be included in the project. So thank you for all you do and for having me. And Angie, thank you. I have to say, I joined the network years ago. And when we were put together, when my dad was home and ill and we were taking care of him, I remember joining the Facebook group, and it provided so much help and support and inspiration. So you do the Lord's work. Thank you. Honestly, I mean that from the bottom of my heart. So anyway, thank you. Yes, in answering your question, Professor, so my full name is YVETTE Manessis Corporon. Yvette comes from Avierini, and people say to me, well, Avierini, how do they get Yvette? Well, Avierini traditionally is Abby or Dawn, and my parents were like, maybe not. And my father liked the French actress Yvette Mimieux because she was blonde and beautiful like my mother. And he said, "Θα τη πούμε Yvette." And everybody said, that's a great idea. So that's where Yvette came from, for Yvette Mimieux, not my yaya, although yaya was part of it too. So yes, as we said, I am from Erikousa, which is a little small island. It's the most northwestern part of Greece, very close to Albania, off the coast of Italy, and which belongs to Kerkyra. And so that's where my father is from, and my mother is from Analipsi, which is a little tiny chorio up in the mountains near Nafpakto. And I always like to joke that I'm sort of the surf and turf Greek, those of us who are from the mountains and the sea. And, like many Greek Americans, I should say, I'm first generation. I grew up with one foot in each culture. My papu came to the US right before World War II, my father's father. And when war broke out, he wasn't able to go back to Greece. My yaya was left in Greece raising 2 young children. And so listening to all of her stories of what life was like during this time, during the Italian and then the Nazi occupation, really inspired me to start putting pen to paper and writing books. And on my mother's side, she came over. My father then came over after the war when my papa was able to bring them over. On my mother's side, my mother came over when she was 18 as a nurse for one of her relatives that was coming to the US. But before my mother, and I didn't know this until recently, and it's so interesting because it's such a theme of my new book, Daughter of Ruins, my great-grandfather, my mother's father, came over in the 1920s to work and build the railroads in the Midwest, as so many Greeks did at the time. And he stayed, and he was faced with such difficulty and discrimination and hardships that he actually went back to Greece. And I wrote this book about that very subject even before I knew that my great-grandfather actually experienced this. And in fact, when my mother came here when she was 18, her papu turned to her and said, "Παιδί μου, δεν μας θέλουν εκεί, μη πας." They don't want us there, don't go. So it sort of gave me chills after I wrote and published this book about similar stories to find that we experienced it in my own family as well.
Do you know where they lived, in which areas? It was always in New York or another state?
So I don't know where my great-grandfather lived, but I know very well where my father's family lived because they came over and they settled in the Bronx, like so many Greek families, in the Pelham Parkway, Grand Concourse area, Zodochopigi Church, which is still a thriving community for many immigrants, many families from Kerkira and Rikusa. And I spent my childhood, on Eastchester Road in the Bronx, surrounded by this beautiful community of Greek immigrants and also the Italian immigrants, because we were the only Greek family on Eastchester Road, surrounded by all the Italian immigrants that came over.
Robert De Niro made this magnificent movie,
yes, The Bronx Tale.
Bronx Tale. So
and we lived it, and so many of us did. And it was such a, incredible, rich, thriving community of different cultures, and also hardships. I remember hearing the stories of when people came over in their families, and everyone came after World War II, and they all had such difficulties, and they were all starting new and excited about their new life and home, but also afraid of losing their culture and their history and their identity. So that was really, those years and those experiences stayed with me, and I think they've inspired each of my books.
And you went to school there? You went to elementary school and high school in the Bronx, or other?
My family moved to Westchester, so I went to school in Westchester, elementary school and high school, and then I went to NYU. As Angie, right here, my fellow NYU alum, I studied journalism and classical civilizations. Journalism because I knew I wanted to have a career in journalism, and I loved it. Classical civilizations because I loved history and classical studies, and even more, I loved mythology. I've always,
But before we go there, I want to give us an idea how was your life. It was English at school or in the neighborhood playing with the other kids, and Greek inside the house?
It was all Greek all the time until I went to school. We spoke Greek at home. My mother got married soon after she came, so she didn't speak English. So my first language was Greek at home, and then I learned English from my friends in school, so much so that our friends, we grew up in a very, New Rochelle was a very Jewish community, very Italian community, so a lot of children and grandchildren of immigrants also. But when it was time for dinner, we would all, be outside playing, and my mother would go outside, and she would call for my brother and I, and she would scream, "Manoli, Yvette," and you'd hear all the other neighborhood kids go, "Dee!" because they listened to us all the time. So yeah, it was very much Greek at home.
So your mother fed all the other children
Of course, that's our jobs. That's what we do as Greek families. But it was also very different because we didn't have the junk food. That was not allowed in our house. Peanut butter and fluff. What is that? That was not allowed. We had real homemade food, and it was. We had a very different cuisine in our home.
This is fantastic. You said the classical because history it is something that you also see in all of your books. But I would like to to ask how that shaped your journey as a writer? You know, your training, your academic training, and also your personal interest in historical issues. But how that shaped, you know, becoming.
How did I come to write historical Greek historical fiction? I'm in my day job. I'm a journalist. I'm a television producer, and
a very good one.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I love my day job, but something was missing. That personal strive to create art. You know, as you're an artist, and there's so many artists in this room, and we all understand that, I wanted to know what it felt like to create something that was mine and mine alone. And I always had a dream of writing a book. And of course, you know, when you set out to write a book, you ask the question, well, what am I going to write about? So I did a little bit of research, and I kept coming back with the same response. What do I write about? The best advice is to write what you know. Write what you know, because this way it is authentic. Because readers, like children and dogs, can smell when something is inauthentic. And so I sat down and I thought about that, and I said, okay, well, write what I know. What do I know? What I knew was to be a daughter of immigrants. What I knew was to have one foot in each culture. What I knew was to sit around the kitchen table with my yaya telling me stories of what life was like in Greece when she was, you know, the Germans were occupying the island and the Nazis were barricading, you know, ransacking our home, searching for hidden Jews. Those are the stories that I grew up on. And I realized then that this was what I knew better than anyone, was to write about the Greek immigrant experience.
Excellent. So this first part was about, you know, the background of you and the family. The second part of our discussion here is to measure how we measure ethnic attachment, and that has to do with you know, interactions. You know, as a sociologist, we focus on interactions, the frequency of interactions, the quality of interactions in a community, because studies show that the immigrant generation struggles, and at some point they achieve socioeconomic mobility. They move out of the ghetto, and you know, they go to suburbia. And I would like to see if we still, as a Greek community, as a Greek American community, have some attachment to you know, the organizations, perhaps the church or other issues. So how was this case here? How active your family was, or you are with the community?
My family was very involved in the community. My father is Thespis Manessis, who was incredibly involved in the Greek American community, especially here in New York. He was one of the founders of Pan Gregorian. He was one of the organizers of the Greek Parade every year. He worked very closely on the Dukakis campaign. So he was very much a community organizer. One of his proudest accomplishments was working with the Department of Education to recognize Greek in their English as a second language program. When he came over from Greece, he went immediately into the New York City public school system, did not speak a word of English, and because of the requirements, was required to learn English and Spanish at the same time with no support in Greek. And so he promised himself that he was ever in a position, he would help children coming from Greece to make sure that no other Greek child ever experienced what he did. So I was very much raised with a sense of strong roots in the Greek community. And as you know, as a child of immigrants growing up in this beautiful, rich environment, you know, it was embedded, and it was part of everything we do. And I think one of the reasons why I'm drawn to writing Greek historical fiction is because I know that my children will never experience what I experienced. They adore their yaya. We live with my mother. We still speak Greek at home, but it's not the same. It's not the same immigrant experience. And I realized that as my grandparents were afraid of losing their Greek identity when they came to the US, which is why it was such an insular community, in many ways, I'm afraid of my children and grandchildren not having the same Greek identity and experiences that I had. And so one of the reasons why I write these books is because I want them to know what it was like to be part of the first immigrants that came here, that settled. You know, now we are very American and very proud of this fact, but those roots and the cultural, historical impact of my childhood are so very important to me that even though my children will never experience the Greece that I'm nostalgic for, I want them to know what it is.
Well, that's a good point. So you still have Greek friends. I mean, the circle of friends. It is also partially Greek, but also
Yes.
you have entered the American mosaic. You're part of the American society. It is compatible to be Greek and American.
I mean, when I was growing up, I think like many Greek Americans, like many children of a first generation, it was confusing because I'm not quite American, although I was. I'm not quite Greek, although I was. Where do you fit in? And now I think it's a badge of honor, to be honest, to have both. I just got my Greek citizenship, and I burst into tears when they said, "Congratulations, you're a citizen." I burst into tears. I'm going to get my passport in 2 weeks, and I can't wait. I'm so excited.
Although you don't need it. But it is something
it is a source of pride for me. It is very
and belonging also.
Absolutely a source of pride and belonging. And when I was a kid going to Greece, ήταν τα Amerikanakια, right? The American kids came, and we weren't quite Greek enough. But now I feel very differently. I feel like I know I'm Greek enough, and I'm very proud of that fact.
Yeah, so you're American in Greece and a Greek in America. You experienced some kind of discrimination at some point?
Never discrimination. No, I mean, except, when I would go to Greece and all the kids would be like, the American kids are here.
Yeah.
It wasn't discrimination. I think it was back then almost like an envy. Like we were so fortunate to be able to have one foot in each culture. I didn't recognize it then, but I recognize it now. I will say this. The only discrimination that I faced was my own. Because as a child growing up outside of New York City and New Rochelle, in this wonderful community, we were the only Greeks in the community, and I wanted to be like everybody else. I would watch the Brady Bunch and see them go to the Grand Canyon on vacation, and we went to the Grand Concourse to make lukumades. That was our vacation for everybody's yorti. We didn't do those things. My yaya didn't take me to Bloomingdale's for lunch, drive a Cadillac and wear pink lipstick. My yaya wore the madili and made psarosupa. So it was a very different world. And I think that was self-imposed. I was embarrassed. I was a little ashamed. My yaya didn't speak English. Everybody else's did.
So either as a child or as an adult, you used to visit Greece?
Oh, yes.
Summer vacation,
yes.
all this. So how you identify yourself again? So you're Greek, American, Greek?
Greek American. Greek American. As I said, when I was younger, it was a little more confusing, but then...
But definitely...
there were so many of us. There's a big community in Erikusa, and so many of the Greek American kids would go every summer.
So I would like us to share some thoughts. What Greece means to you, or what America means to you on the other side?
I mean, they're both home. I feel very strongly they're both home. When I was very little, we didn't go as often. The first time I went to Greece, I was 11. So I didn't go every summer as a child. First time I went, I was 11. And it was just a wonderful summer. And then I went again, it was very expensive. You can't send your family off to Greece every summer. But then a few years later, we would go as a family whenever we could. But then when I got to a point where I was in junior high and high school, and my parents were comfortable to put me on a plane, I would go and I would save my money. And then when I was a young adult working, I remember marching into my boss's office as a young journalist working in a newsroom in New York City, my first TV news job. And I walked into my boss's office and I said, well, August is coming up, so I'm going to need the month off. And she looked at me like I was insane. Like, what? What are you talking about? I was like, well, I'm Greek. We go home for August. But she let me go. They actually let me go. So it was, and now, same with my children. We, it is very expensive, as we all know. And It is not easy, but my husband and I made a commitment. I very much wanted my children to view Greece as their second home, especially Kerkyra, because we go to Kerkyra as much as we can. And I looked at my husband a couple of months ago because my kids were like, "Are we going to Kerkyra this summer?" And I was like, "Okay, mission accomplished. We've done what we set out to do."
Yeah, because there are some teachers here and people who are concerned about the evolution of Greek language in the States, and in New York in particular. Do you see differences from the way you use the language when you're growing up and now you see it with your children or younger people?
Oh, tremendously, and very much so. I'm fluent in Greek, but I speak my yaya's Greek. I speak everyday common Greek, and I'm very comfortable speaking Greek, and I have done live television interviews in Greece. But I will always say, "Milao apla Hellenica." I speak very simple Greek. When I watch the TV news today, I don't understand what they're saying, and that really upsets me. Because I'm speaking Greek and being fluent and being part of the community is so important to me. And I really struggle with the fact that I don't speak these 5, syllable words that they use on the news. So that's something that I'm trying to get better and learn more about.
I'm glad that in one of your books you talk about the local dialects.
Yes.
And this is very precious to people to realize that, communities have developed different symbols, and
Absolutely.
This is a great thing that you did. As far as concerned, since you're a journalist, as far as concerned media, you read the Greek newspaper or you get the news from Greece. How you receive the news from Greece?
I try as much as I can online. My mother, the Greek news is always on in our home. So I have to turn to her and go, what did they say? Can you explain that to me? So I try to absorb as much as I possibly can. Online, thankfully a lot of the newspapers, I can read Greek, but again, it takes me a while. But thankfully there's English translation, you just click that button. And so I try to keep up as much as I can.
And the use of the social media with relatives and friends in Greece, it is constant thing. Also your children?
Yes, so social media I have a love-hate with it, but it has been a game changer because growing up, we would only see our relatives when we went to Greece. And maybe they would call and we'd talk to them at Pascha or for your name day. But there wasn't that every day. And now we can FaceTime. My mother still has a flip phone. She doesn't have an iPhone or use a computer, but I can FaceTime with my family and say, "Mom, look, Thea's on the phone." And she can stay in touch with her family. And so we are so much more deeply connected now than we were when we were children. And that is, I think, one of the greatest gifts of technology.
Yeah. Are you afraid of AI?
I refuse to use any AI. I don't know that I'm afraid of it, but I want no part of it in my life. I want no part of it in my books. I don't use it at any way in my career, in my personal life. It's just not something I choose not to do. I'm sure that there's great and purposeful uses for it, but not for me.
In your books, you're exploring themes related to history, the Second World War, other things. You have a personal experience also in the family experience about saving the Greek Jewish populations. You talk about the Holocaust, very sensitive things. How all these events have influenced you in relation to your family's experiences?
Well, it's interesting because I grew up listening to these stories. All right? I grew up listening to my yaya talk about there was a Jewish tailor named Savas Israel, and he was hiding from the Nazis. He came to Erikusa, and everybody, it wasn't just my yaya, I'm always very clear about this, everybody on Erikusa helped hide and save this family. Even those who didn't want them there, who knew it was too dangerous, nobody gave them up to the Nazis, and this beautiful family survived. So when I started looking into this story a little bit deeper and realized this was one of the inspirations for my first book, When the Cypress Whispers, it wasn't until that moment that I realized that history doesn't just exist in textbooks and not taught in, history is not only taught in, college lecture halls by, brilliant and well-educated gentlemen like yourself, Professor. History is in our homes. History was my yaya and the Madilis during the Cazzarola telling me what it was like during World War II when the Nazis were in our home looking for the Jews. And it wasn't until I realized that it was sort of an aha moment for me, And that was the inspiration for my first book. My second book, Something Beautiful Happened, is actually a memoir about my search for the family my yaya helped hide and save. And because of the research that went into this book, and the incredible stories that we shared about the Greek Jews about the Jewish Greeks and during the Holocaust, many people didn't even know that Greek Jews exist. Many people didn't even know in America that the Germans actually occupied Greece and that there was a Holocaust in Greece. And so it's because of this that it sort of opened my eyes to the importance and the value of these family stories.
So you see, you feel a responsibility as an author to continue sharing stories like that.
I mean, I love it. I love it.
Although it was our private conversation before, but if you like to share what you told me earlier, and that shows the universality of Greek values when you visited people in Israel or in Palestine and how they responded to you.
Yeah, I will tell this story, especially now this story is more relevant than ever. When I was a 19-year-old college student, 18-year-old college student, I went to study journalism in Israel. That was quite a phone call when I applied for the program, and I called my Greek mother and said, "Mom, I'm going to Israel to study." Where are you going? Anyway, I did go. It was 1989. It was during the first Intifada, and it was a very volatile time. And I knew that I wanted to learn more about the Mideast to understand what was happening, because I needed to be a journalist. You have to not just read about the world, but you have to understand the world and experience the world. So I spent the summer in Israel. And as I said, it was a very volatile time. So I would go to the Jewish neighborhoods, and they would look at me and say, where are you from with your dark hair and your olive skin? And I didn't want to say that I was American because of the climate at the time. And I would say, "Oh, I'm Greek." And they would say, "Oh, you're Greek? You're one of ours. Come home with me. Come have Shabbat dinner with my family." And I did. I would go home with these families to get to know them. And they were beautiful, and they welcomed me as if I was a family member. And then I would go to East Jerusalem. I'd go to the Palestinian neighborhoods, and I would meet the Palestinians. And they would say to me, "Where are you from with your dark hair and your olive skin?" And I would say, "I'm Greek." And the Palestinians would say, "You're one of ours. Come home with us. Come meet my family. Come have dinner with us." And I did. And I spent time with both the Israeli families and the Palestinian families. And they welcomed me warmly and beautifully as I was a member of their family. And I realized then that being Greek was my superpower, that it opened doors and welcomed me everywhere.
That's a very good
a timely story. Unfortunately, it's more timelier than we ever imagined.
One last question regarding your vocation, your professional part of your life. Journalism used to be something independent, like many other things perhaps. How do you feel as a professional on that field, the implication of the elite capital controlling a lot of networks of journalism? We saw recently that a very rich person who bought a newspaper dictated that you're not allowed to take a position on political issues, for example. Right?
Yeah, I will say this, here in this country, we have a lot of work to do. There are still, I now work in entertainment news. I used to work in hard news. I worked at CBS News, I worked at Fox 5 News, I worked at Good Morning America. And my husband is also a journalist. My father-in-law was a journalist, and now my daughter is a journalist working for NBC Network News. We take journalism and journalistic ethics very seriously in our family. There are still those of us who do. Unfortunately, the climate in this country has turned, and there are news outlets and news organizations that are looking to fill time, and those journalistic ethics are not necessarily the most important thing on the agenda. And I think that it's a real wake-up call. And I think that the American public has a lot of homework to do, and to really find out where they're getting their news source from, and try to focus and try to sample and read and listen to different things. And propaganda, and it's important to understand. And there is a time and a place to listen to different opinions, and that is fine. But understand that if you're watching a certain 24-hour news channel that has a political slant or an agenda, that it is opinion. It is not necessarily fact. And it's wonderful to listen to all these opinions, but it's also time to do the work and seek out the journalists who truly are there to give you the facts, and then you can decide what your opinion is.
Now we move on to the last two questions regarding the oral history interview before we go deeper to your books. I would like your vision, your thoughts. How do you see the future of Hellenism in America? And the recent census shows that there are about 1.3, 1.5 million Americans of Greek descent in this country, according to the last census. The American-born Americans, since the census of 2000, are numerically more than the immigrant generations. So we have a tremendous shift, generational shift. So based on your experiences and observations, what advice or suggestions will you offer to new Greek immigrants to the United States?
New Greek immigrants to the U.S.? I mean, I think that it is a beautiful melting pot, and to not be afraid of becoming part of the American culture, because you can still maintain your Greek culture. My grandparents were afraid of losing their Greek identity. And, you don't necessarily have to. You can be both American and you can be Greek. And I think that it is a fascinating time, actually, to be a Greek American in this country. And I've been told, going back and forth to Greece, by some of my Greek relatives, that the American Greeks actually hold on to the Greek culture and traditions even more because we're so afraid of losing them, which I think is fascinating. So, there is a way that you can be multicultural, and we can, pay tribute to our ancestors and our heritage and our history and our culture while still celebrating the beautiful melting pot that is the U.S. We're so fortunate to be able to do that. But it does take work. We have to keep those traditions alive, and that is work.
And to the new American-born generations, how you think they're going to continue feeling, expressing themselves as Greek? Do you think that it will be continuity?
Well, that is up to the family. I mean, that is our jobs, right? Those of us who grew up in the culture, that is our job to show our children the beauty of this culture, to make them want to continue. My family is fortunate. I've been able to take my children to Greece several times.
But is it enough only the family? Should the community have healthy institutions?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. But it starts at home, just like everything, doesn't it?
I hate to say it, but I've said it many, many different times. Astoria, which is the symbol of Greek immigration to the States, and concentrated a lot of Greeks at certain times. If you move around, you're going to find hundreds of Greek businesses, hundreds of property owned places, buildings, etc. But you will never find a bookstore.
There is a Astoria bookstore. There is owned by a Greek American woman.
This is a different story. This is a recent issue, and nobody knows her, and she has no contact with the community. At some point, it was the African American guy, rather the Nigerian guy for many, many years. You'll never find a gallery. So it's not only the families, I think, but also the institutions, and the community has a problem there. Maybe it is different than the time you were born, when the institutions were stronger, probably because they were built or created by the immigrant generations. I don't know if the American-born generations can continue building their own institutions to serve their interests and needs. Do you see that we can have new institutions created?
I mean, I think, as you said, community is the core of everything, and I mean, how can you have a community without these institutions that bring people together? And it's incredibly important. And I agree with you. It's something that is, perhaps not as strong as my generation or my parents' generation, And that's a great question. I mean, what is the answer?
This transition is not an easy transition. And the last question on this part, since we're talking about Greece, Greek Americans, etc. Recently, Greece passed a new law allowing Greeks living abroad to participate in the national elections from their country of residence. What is your opinion on this development? Do you agree or disagree with this decision, and why?
To allow
Voting,
Greeks in the diaspora to vote?
Yeah.
I mean, I absolutely think it's wonderful. I mean, and it will, again, I have not voted in a Greek election yet. I very much look forward to now that I'm a new citizen. But I know that if I am able to exercise my right to vote, I will educate myself more. I will lean in more. I will make sure that I'm much more aware of who the candidates are and what the issues are and what the challenges facing Greece today are, whereas if I wasn't able to. And so, you know, that, again, it puts the onus on me to take that right very seriously and to make use of it.
In that way, you can build up on having a better relationship with Greece and the American board in particular to know more. This is an interesting position. Thank you very much for the oral history part. Now we go to the second part, which is, if not equally, definitely more important or more you know, sophisticated, I guess, is about the books. And I would like to mention that Angie's interior decoration, you know, abilities. This is great, you know. And I remember I love him as a writer, but I'm very skeptical about his politics. Jorge Luis Borges, when he said that he was blind, you know, he went totally blind at some point, and he imagined heaven to be, you know, bookshelves, to be a library. You know? So this is very nice. Thank you very much for doing this. I think that will stay with the Greek American authors, to the synagogue, right? To the authors. You don't leave it here to Alexandra, right? Yes. So this is the book, and I'm telling you, I mean, it's, you know, almost 400 pages.
It's 415 pages.
Yeah, I mean, this is, and I'm sure that you wrote more and you have to break it down.
When my editor wanted to kill me because you know, I think it's probably, I probably had about another 200 pages in there that I had to edit down because the story just, yeah. That's a good idea. Let's start you know, from the beginning, the genesis, right? So what inspired you to write Daughter of Ruins? I had a 2-book deal and I had to write a second book. My publisher needed a second book, but I was going to write another book anyway. So Daughter of Ruins was very much inspired by a couple of things. I was fascinated by the exodus of Greek men from Greece to the United States and what that did to communities in Greece, right? We know that there was, you know, economic situations in some villages, or in the Ionian Islands, Kefalonia, the earthquake of 1953 decimated the island and there was nothing left. So some of the men left then. I look at my own grandfather who left to try to make money to send to bring his family to America. So I was really fascinated by why did the men leave? What did they find when they came to the US, and what happened to those who were left behind? Those who were left behind, in many cases, were the women. There was no one left to marry, or there were no businesses because there were no men to build businesses. And then what happened to the men when they came here? They were working, they were struggling to make money, but there were no women here for them to build families and foundations and communities. What did they do? They ended up importing women. This is where the Greek picture brides came in. So all of this history just really fascinated me, and I wanted to weave together a story talking about the challenges and the difficulties of the men and the women, and the early Greek immigrant experience in sort of the 1920s, and then later in the 1950s and 60s.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. In our research, we have realized that overwhelming majority of Greek migration, especially the first wave between 1900s and 1920s. It was, predominantly males.
Yeah.
And definitely, if we have communities in America, it's because women came. So we owe a lot to Greek women creating, helping, supporting, and the evolution of Greek American communities. But you set it up in Greece, and I would like to know in your narrative why you choose this particular location. You have a location which is close to your heart, I guess.
Yes. So all of my books are set at least partially in Kerkyra. That is what I know. I'm fascinated. The Ionian Islands, the history of the Ionian Islands is very different than some of the other islands of Greece. I'm fascinated by the rich history of Kerkyra, invaded by the Venetians for more than 400 years, which you can still see today in the beautiful architecture, in the food. I write about the food, pastitsada, which is like, the island's favorite dish. It's like our iconic, Corfiot cuisine. Comes from the Venetians and the Venetian spice trade, and I love the history of how all that affects not just the architecture but the food. And then it was invaded by the French and the British, and I love this beautiful tapestry of history. And also it takes place in Kefalonia. And I was fascinated by the history in Kefalonia because you had the Italian occupation, and then you had the Germans come in. And then the Germans massacred thousands of Italian soldiers because they wouldn't surrender their guns. And then after that, you had the earthquake in 1953 that decimated the island. But the thing that I loved most about Kefalonia, and really just sort of I was like, as a writer, and you know this, you kind of you get, when you know that you hit on something that you want to write about, you get this goosebumps. And when I read about the snakes of Panagia in Kefalonia, and the omen of the snakes, that was I knew there's a story here. So in Kefalonia, there's a church, Panagia, and every year before August 15th, the week before, the snakes come out. And it's said that the snakes come from, back, I think it's in the 1700s, there was a threat of invasion. And the nuns in this monastery hid themselves in a room, and they prayed, God, please save us. And when the invaders knocked down the door, the nuns were gone, but only snakes were slithering on the floor. So the snakes come out every year, October 15th, but only twice in history have the snakes not come out. 1941, right before the beginning of World War II, and 1953, days before the earthquake. So the two omens of bad omens of the snakes not showing up, I thought were such a fascinating way to set up an omen for what would happen in this book to this community, and those were sort of the seeds that led to Daughter Ruins.
I would like you to introduce. Do I hear voices or is it just me?
We have some opera singers.
It's okay, Nico. The lavaliers are very proximal to your mouth, so we're not gonna hear them. Don't worry about the video later.
Well, we're celebrating all sorts of art tonight, including opera.
Sound that it's okay.
Well, both Kerkyra and Kefalonia, they are very, musical places.
We're very dramatic.
And very dramatic. I would like us to make the introductions and introduce your main characters in this book.
So Dimitra is my main character of the book, and she is an aspiring artist. And she is motherless. She lost her mother when she was 3 years old in the United States. And her father, after the mother died, took her back to raise her in Kefalonia. And her father is very distant, very sort of stereotypical 1940s, very distant, not very warm, not very loving. And so she dreams that her dead mother watches over her, like the goddesses she reads about in her mythology books. And all she wants to do is create art. And of course, in the 1950s in Greece, women were not, they were not, the red carpet was not rolled out for young female artists. You were a wife and a mother, and your place was in the kitchen or the bedroom. And so Dimitra very much is fighting for her worth at a time where women were valued for their dowries. And then we have Elena, who is a beautiful Italian prostitute. She dreamed of a life away from the brothels where she was raised in Italy, but dreams are not meant for daughters of prostitutes, and so she had no choice but to become one herself. She finds herself in Kefalonia, entertaining the Italian soldiers, and then of course the Germans come and her life changes in drastic ways. And then lastly, we have Maria, who we meet her in 1913, and she is a young picture bride, ripped from her village in Karditsa, sent to marry a stranger in America, as we discussed. So Daughter of Ruins is the intersection of the lives of these three women fighting for their worth and very much working and striving to become the women that they aspire to be and know they are meant to be, rather than who society tells them they should be.
How is that relevant to you? Is a question I wanted to ask even before, but now is a good moment to ask it. If your family are supportive when you decide to become an author, a writer?
Oh, very much so. I mean, I have to say, you know, they've always been very supportive of my dreams, but when I started writing, I had a day job as a producer for Extra. I had 2 young children. When I started writing my first book, my son was 2 and my daughter was 5. And it was a lot, but I had this passion inside of me that I wanted to follow. And, you know, there were times where I'd get lost and I would be sitting there writing away for hours, you know, and my husband would turn to me and say, "Are we going to feed the kids tonight?" You're like, "What are we doing?" Yeah. So, you know, it's been very much, my children are older now. And so now when I lock myself away for hours at a time, no one cares or even notices. But when the children were little and we were juggling, you know, 2 careers and 2 small children and responsibilities and, you know, aging parents, it was very much a struggle and it was not easy. But I always felt very supported, I should say.
I would like to know more about the writing process. You write during evenings, nights, early in the morning?
Never at night. I'm not a nighttime writer. I don't have any, like, my brain power just is gone. The battery runs dry. I'm an early morning writer. When my children were little, I would set the alarm for 4 o'clock in the morning so I could write for 1 hour before I started making the lunches and preparing and getting everything ready to start my day. And then I started waking up at 3 a.m. before the alarm because the characters that I was creating would wake me up to tell me their stories. And I couldn't wait. I would jump out of bed, you know, at sometimes 2, sometimes 3 in the morning to go downstairs, put on the coffee, and listen to what the characters had to say to me. My life shifted. It changed very much because, you know, instead of putting the kids to bed and staying up to watch TV or have a glass of wine, I would put the kids to bed and I would go right to bed because I knew I wanted to get up early. And I'm still a very much an early morning writer. I still have my day job. I'm still a producer with Extra, so I have a very demanding day job. But I try to write before that day starts.
That's very the writing process is extremely needs discipline, needs
it's
sacrifices,
tenacity,
and many other things.
So many sacrifices. When people say to me, "I want to be a writer," I'm like, yes, absolutely, but understand what you're getting yourself into because it is tremendous sacrifice, absolute tremendous sacrifice.
You have to walk the line.
It's not just walking the line. It's I don't even know what to call it. You know, but I always say, you know, I am a Greek American journalist. Good luck finding anyone who's more stubborn and tenacious than I am. Greek American female journalist. So, you know, good luck with that. But writing it's wonderful and it's rewarding, but it is hard work. Hard work.
You have an audience in mind? Or
when I write the book?
Or
so
you write for yourself?
I write for myself. And there have been many times, especially in the more difficult years, you know, now this is my 4th book, 10 years now. So thankfully, you know, you always want a larger audience, but I know that I have an audience. And I know that I have people who've supported me for 10 years and read my book for 10 years. You know, we want more and more and more. But there have been times in that journey when you wonder, is anyone going to read this book? Is it worth it? I'm sacrificing. Everyone is out enjoying their lives, and I'm sitting here alone in this room staring at this computer again. Is it worth it? And
this is how you write? You do computer or pen?
Computer. Oh, definitely computer. Yeah, no. I couldn't read my handwriting if I did that. But there have been many times, you know, I have a lot of friends who are writers, and a lot of them write very successful fiction, mysteries, women's fiction, and they sell tens of thousands of books. And that's wonderful. But as I said before, you have to write what you know. And these are the stories that I want to tell. These are the stories that make me happy. And if a reader picks up the book and feels something, I've also learned that when I get a note from a reader who tells me they've been moved by my story, that my story made them cry, that's enough for me. That is everything to me. And so I write for myself, and hopefully it'll resonate with someone else.
So in all your previous books and in this one, you often blend historical events, as we said, with personal stories. And Daughter of Ruins is part of it. But I would like to know, how does this book differ from the previous one?
This one's a little different because I have 3 main characters, and I sort of delved into areas that I had never previously. I think the other 3 were a little bit more personal, and here I think I flexed my writing muscles a little bit more. And I have to say, when I first wrote this book and people responded and said, "This is your best book," I would say, "Come on, no." And now I actually do think it's my best book. Because like anything that you do, my hope is that I'm growing as a writer. And my 4th book, 10 years after my first one was published, I hope that I've learned a lot. When I first sat down, I didn't know what I was doing. I still don't know what I'm doing. I was just writing, and I'm going to write a story. Now I know that I need to sit down, I need to plot, I need a climax, I need an act 3, a chapter 4. So this book is a little bit more technical also. And so I hopefully people...
And also the way you have divided, going back and forth in different periods, which is something that you...
Yeah, non-linear,
and non-linear, and this is very, very interesting. I find the title, Daughter of Ruins, to be quite evocative. How can you explain its significance to the story?
Yeah, so I love this title so much. Thank you for saying that, because I really struggled in finding the title. This story, as I was writing this book, my editor used to laugh at me because she would say, "What are we going to call it?" And I started calling it The Beast with No Name, because it was a beast and it had no name, and I never knew if it was going to even finish. But Daughter of Ruins, as I said, it's about 3 women, and each of the women are ruined, or society has tried to ruin them in some way. And each of these women struggles and fights to build something and to be their authentic selves when they are told they should not. So out of the ashes and out of the difficulties are these 3 extraordinary women who sacrifice and help other women and build each other up, even when others are trying to tear them down. And so I thought that it was a very evocative title that really told the story of what this book is about.
Well, I don't want to give away any spoilers, but is this what we hope readers can take away from Daughter of Ruins?
I hope that readers learn something, and I hope that they're moved. I hope they're, of course, entertained, but I hope that they're moved. That is something that's very important to me. I even when I was, in my television producing days, still producing, but stories, I like to make you feel something. And what is art if it doesn't evoke emotion? And I want to make you feel something when you pick up this book and read it. And I've heard from many readers that it has, and it brought them to tears several times. And for me, that is mission accomplished.
You have any favorite character, or
that's like asking me to choose a favorite child. Not that I do. Well, no, I actually don't.
And usually mothers do that. They have favorites.
I know they do. I know they do. I will never admit to it. No, I don't know that I have a favorite character, but I will say this. The character of Maria, the picture bride, I knew that I wanted to incorporate the picture bride because it's so fascinating to me, that this was accepted and necessary at the time. But if we look at the picture brides through the lens of today, it's human trafficking, it's child trafficking. These were girls as young as 14, 15 years old, ripped from their families and sent to marry a stranger. I mean, it's unbelievable to me. And so when I started writing the character of Maria, who is the picture bride, initially she was going to have a smaller part in the book, and she just came to life. And as I said before, and I know you might think I'm crazy listening to this, but as some characters wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning to tell their stories, Maria was just easy to write. Like her story just flowed, her dialogue flowed, and I couldn't wait to tell more of it. And I started writing more and more, and she became a much larger character than I initially envisioned.
Yeah, because you're dealing with very complex themes. So some of them are very, very challenging themes. So one of them was that exactly, right?
Yes.
How we deal with relevant issues now. It's not only.
I think that's the beauty, though, of historical fiction, and why I'm so drawn to it, because we can examine complex and very difficult, very, very difficult subject matter, and hopefully learn about it in a way that will educate and entertain, and as I said, make you feel something.
Yeah, and your non-linear way of writing, going back and forth in periods, for me, it gave me this sense that how the past can impact the present and then going back again. So what are we? What kind of animals are human beings? How we deal with our present and the future? Is the past something that we need to forget or build on it?
I mean, for me...
How you deal with the issue of the past?
For me, that was a very effective way of peeling back the layers of my characters. Like, for example, Pericles, who is the father, who I mentioned earlier, emotionally unavailable. He was not abusive, he was not cruel to his daughter, but he just was unavailable to her in ways that a child needs nurturing and loving. And why did this man not give this daughter, he gave her all the material things in the world, but he never showed her the love and affection that a child needs. By writing this book in a non-linear fashion, by the end of the book, as I'm unpeeling the layers and showing more of the flashbacks of what happened, you realize the trauma that he experienced and the difficulties. And as an early Greek immigrant, the discrimination, the being targeted by the KKK, being called a dirty Greek, the Greek diners that were firebombed, the Greek diners that were boycotted, the businesses that were ruined, decimated. You know, in Omaha, Nebraska, the Greektown riots, there was a thriving community, Greek community, that was destroyed when the white mob came after the Greek immigrants. And so you realize, you then later learn in this non-linear fashion, that there's a reason why he's so emotionally detached, because he sacrificed and lost so much that it affected him in this way.
As a Greek American and an author, what are your thoughts on Greek American literature? Do you think that there is a distinct Greek American literature, a tradition? How would you characterize it?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I wish there was more of it. And I know that there are so many Greek Americans out there who, you know, would like to write books and have thought about writing books. And I encourage them to sit down and write those books, because we need more of our voices out there. You know, and another reason why I write and I will stick to Greek historical fiction is because if you're a reader and you see there are a million books, and I love, you know, give me a World War II French book, I will devour it. Give me a World War II, you know, British, Europe, I will devour. I love these stories. But there are tons of them out there, and there are very few of the Greek experience. When I wrote Where the Wandering Ends, people had no idea that there was even a Greek civil war. People had no idea that what happened between the communists and the monarchists, and that, you know, how many children were taken behind the Iron Curtain, some to never return to Greece. Why is it that we know, and there are so many books about the, you know, the orphan trains of the Great American Depression, and there are so many books about the Kindertransport of World War II. But, you know, and of course, thank God for Nicolas Cage and Hellenic and his, you know, Nick Cage is such a beautiful and strong, inspiring voice for Greek American literature. But we need more. We need more of them.
Like Harry Mark Petrakis from Chicago and many other great.
And they are out there, and we need, you know, and we need to add and continue to add our voices.
Greeks have a continuous presence, you know, from 300 to 500 years continuously here in America. But our schools, they don't teach Greek American literature or Greek American history. Maybe this is part of the problem, because we don't learn about Greek Americans.
I mean, I think that, you know, we learn about classical Greece, but we don't learn about anything about modern Greece. I think you're absolutely right. And so until that happens, then perhaps we should educate ourselves.
What's next for you? Are you working on any new projects now?
The seeds are planted for another book. This one will be, I think, a little bit of a departure. It'll still be historical fiction, but it'll be more based on more of a biographical historical fiction, based on a character who I think in modern Greek history who inspires me. So I'm just starting to do some research there.
What advice or recommendation will you give to young writers starting their journey now?
Oh my goodness. A couple of things. First of all, be tenacious. Sit your butt in that chair. Nothing gets done without sitting in the chair. I have so many friends and so many people who've come up to me and I've thought about writing, and they love to talk about thinking about writing. They love to talk about writing, but they're not actually writing. You have to sit in that chair and stare at that computer screen or pen to paper and actually sit down to do the work. And even if it's a little at a time, even if it's a few words, it has to be consistent. You must sit down in that chair every day, because those few words will eventually be a sentence, and that sentence will eventually be a paragraph, which will eventually fill a page, which will eventually become a chapter. And only by doing that consistently again and again will you find yourself with a book. And sometimes you will do nothing more than stare at the blank page, and that is horrible, and it's a terrible feeling, and I experience it all the time. Sometimes it doesn't go, it doesn't come, it doesn't flow. It doesn't matter. Get up the next day, sit back down on the chair. Eventually, if you're persistent, it will come. And the other thing is, failure is part of the process. Failure is very much part of the process. And if you want to be a writer, and if you want to be published, prepare to fail, prepare to take that, learn from it, learn how you can be better, and go back in. It took me several years to write and edit When the Cypress Whispers, and then I had years of the most horrific rejections that left me in tears again and again and again, to the point where I thought, this will never get published, this is never going to happen. I was told the writing is not strong enough, this book doesn't make any sense, I wish the story were better, this will never sell, it's not commercial. Well, eventually, one person did say yes, who helped me publish that book, who sold it to HarperCollins, who then sold it to 16 countries around the world, who made it an international bestseller after years of horrible rejection. It takes one person to believe in you, one person. Don't give up until you find that person, because they're out there.
Wow, this is very precious. This is in concluding our interview, but I would like, as overall, to end this, if you are kind enough and willing to share a passage or two from your book in your own voice, because part of what we do in the Hellenic American Project is to document the artists in their own voices.
Sure.
So people have to see, as you said, the female, professional and author to be, in your own voice, a passage.
I'd be honored. So I have a
I told you I have many that I really like, but I want to see.
So I have it's a very short chapter. It takes about 5 minutes, if that's enough. So this chapter is, hello, I just put the wrong chapter. I'm going to find it for you. So this chapter that I'm interested in reading to you is when our young artist Dimitra has been watching, here we go. Our young artist Dimitra has been watching Elena, who is the Italian prostitute, entertain the troops, entertain the soldiers. And she's been inspired by her, and her laughter it just has lit up Dimitra's life. And then, as I mentioned before, the Italian soldiers are massacred by the Germans. And Elena no longer has partners to dance with and no longer has any joy. And Dimitra is so inspired by Elena and so misses listening to her laughter and watching her dance on the shore with the soldiers that she sits down and for the first time allows herself to create art that means something. And so she takes this gift, this package, to Elena's house, and she knocks on the door, but Elena doesn't answer. And Dimitra slips the package under the door and goes to leave. And as she's leaving, she turns and she sees smoke coming from the chimney, and she realizes that Elena was home the entire time, but she didn't answer the door. And so she's devastated that she worked so hard on this painting and Elena won't even answer the door for her. Okay, so this is inside, from Elena's perspective, Kefalonia, Greece, 1943. That morning inside the house, Elena had pulled the quilt over the bed and tidied up the dishes from her simple breakfast of hard-boiled eggs and orange slices. Each day was the same. She would make a fire and then settle into her chair, a blanket draped across her shoulders and lap, and spend the afternoons and often well into the evening staring into the blaze. Within the frenetic dance of the darting flames, Elena watched transfixed and transported as scenes of her life played out. Between the flames, she saw images of herself as a young girl, the lonely childhood among the pleasure houses of Sicily, where her mother and the other women did their best collectively to raise her in between entertaining their clients. There, in the thick smoke rising and swirling up the chimney, images of her school years played out like a newsreel on a cinema screen. She could see herself clearly as if it were yesterday, sitting alone in the back row of the school, the other children forbidden from sitting with her or playing with her. Among the orange embers burning themselves out until they were nothing more than dead black lumps, she saw the moment she realized what she was, what she had been destined to be. Elena was 19 years old and filled with dreams and possibility when she splurged her savings on a beautiful black dress, cut elegantly like the ones worn by the women who worked in the bank. And that day, as she sat straight in her chair in her tasteful dress, the employment officer announced that no one would ever hire a woman like her. It did not matter that she carried herself with the refined elegance she'd studied on the screens of the American films she devoured in the cinema. It did not matter that she was a virgin who attended Mass each Sunday and sometimes during the week as well. Her fate had been decided by where she was born and to whom. Elena closed her eyes and replayed that afternoon in her mind like she had countless times before. She had left the employment office in tears, returned to the pleasure house, and told her mother what happened. Elena sat on the bed and cried, watching as her mother wrapped the black dress in tissue paper before tucking it away in the back of the closet. Elena's mother then took her by the hand and led her downstairs to the salon, where she sold her daughter's virtue to the highest bidder. And in the darting flames, Elena saw glimpses of her life in Kefalonia before the day that devastated them all. She wondered and dreamed endlessly about the boys who had, in her arms, imagined themselves men. Hers had been the last to caress their cheeks, to stroke their hair. She had been their last embrace, their final kiss. And she could not help but wonder, could not help but hope and pray that in some way the finality of it all made it somehow matter, for them and for her. She focused on the flames, desperate to see those images of happier times replayed before her again. All she had left were the images embellished in her mind and in the fire. They were all gone now. She had no proof that their time together had happened, that it had mattered, that she had mattered. But the young girl from the bluff, this is Dimitra the artist, had been a witness to it all. Elena had been so excited when she spotted the girl coming up the path towards the door that morning. Elena glanced at herself in the mirror, tidying her hair and pinching her pale cheeks to bring some color and life to her complexion, readying herself to open the door and welcome the girl inside. As she lunged toward the door, Elena stopped herself. She felt the cold metal of the doorknob in her hand and easily could have turned it. With one swift movement, she could have ushered the girl inside and reminisced together about the handsome young men and the laughter and the songs. Then more memories came rushing back to Elena. The whispers and the stares of the women in town, the way they pointed at her and held tight to their children, warning their sons to stay away from women like her, warning their daughters to keep their distance. She remembered the pain of what it was to be an innocent young girl, so unfairly branded and judged, and she took pity on the young girl who knew loneliness as well as she did. Releasing her fingers from the doorknob, Elena turned and walked away from the door. She dragged the chair further into the recess of the room, away from the light and the window, and sat down and listened as the girl knocked and called her name. When she was certain that the girl had left, Elena finally stood. Wrapping her shawl around her shoulders, she walked over to see what the girl had slipped under the door. She unwrapped the paper, her once perfectly manicured fingernails now clipped and jagged as they slipped under the wrapping to reveal what was inside. Oh, she sighed as the paper fell away. Instinctively, she drew her hand to her mouth, dropped the paper, and watched as it drifted to the floor. She stood motionless, staring down at the gift. It was a drawing, a black and white pencil drawing of Elena on the beach. Her head was tipped back, her eyes wide and bright, as a young soldier held her in his arms, twirling her in time to the music. The fine details, the glint in her eye, the laughter in his, were all drawn in black and white. The only color on the page was the crimson of her lips, the imprint of her lipstick on his cheek, the red of her fingernails, which she ran through his dark hair. Elena smiled as she recognized the familiar stain of her lipstick on the page. Taking the drawing in her hand, she sat back down in the chair where she spent the rest of the afternoon gazing at a drawing made by a young girl whose name she did not know, and yet who managed to capture a fleeting moment in time when Elena's existence had mattered.